Sir, can you hear me? He's got no pulse worth calling.
Intoxication. Let him sleep it off.
There's a difference, Doctor. I'd know it. I need pads.
Already have them.
I'm gonna pace him. I don't have an order. Write it down. What in God's name are you doing? Keeping him alive.
You're a floor nurse, Nolan. You take vitals. You don't do this. Not somebody I'd trust with a life.
Can't have a foul.
The rain had followed him inside. That was the first thing anyone noticed about the man in the gray coat. The way the water ran off him and pooled on the tile. And then it was the only thing they didn't notice because he folded to the floor without a sound. No wallet. No phone, no name. Just a soaked man of maybe 60 going down in a crowded Washington emergency room at the worst hour of the worst night of the week. A tech glanced over, saw the plain coat and the scuffed shoes, and said 2 words without looking up. Another one. Then he went back to his clipboard, because in this city the nameless collapse all the time, and nobody expected this one to matter. One nurse did. Harper Nolan heard those 2 words from across the room, and something in her went very still. She was 34 years old, and she had been on her feet for 11 hours. Her shoes squeaked when she moved, because the mop water near the triage desk never fully dried, and every step she took across that hall announced her before she arrived. Wet rubber on old tile. The other nurses had stopped hearing it years ago. Harper never stopped hearing it. It was the sound of being noticed for the wrong thing, and she had grown up with that sound in one form or another her whole life. She was not the nurse anyone looked at twice. She was heavier than the young ones fresh from their programs, quieter than the loud ones who ran the floor with laughter and gossip, older than the interns who called her ma'am without meaning anything by it. She wore the same 2 cardigans on rotation because the third had a stain she couldn't lift, and she took the night shift because the night shift was where they put the ones they had decided not to think about. Harper knew that. She had made her peace with it a long time ago, or she had told herself she had, which is not the same thing, and on nights like this one, the difference showed. There was one man on that floor who saw her differently, though he was not the kind to say so. Eli Brandt worked the night ambulance bay, a lean, unhurried paramedic who had buried his wife 2 winters back and gone quiet in his own way. For a year now, 2 quiet people had worked the same dark hours and traded almost no words, and understood each other completely. When Harper crossed the hall toward the soaked man on the floor, Eli was already moving with her, without being asked, the way you move alongside someone you've learned to trust. Harper knelt down beside the stranger before anyone had decided he was worth the trouble. "Sir," she put 2 fingers to his throat. "Sir, can you hear me?" The resident arrived a half-step behind her. His name was Dr. Vance, and he was young in the way that only the very confident are young, the kind of man who had never once in his life been overlooked, and therefore did not believe overlooking was a thing that happened to real people. He looked at the man on the floor, and he looked at Harper kneeling beside him, and he made a decision about both of them in under a second. "Intoxication," Vance said. "Let him sleep it off in the corner. I've got 3 real cases waiting." "He's got no pulse worth calling a pulse," Harper said quietly. "His skin's cold and his lips are going. He smells like the street. He smells like the rain." She looked up at him. "There's a difference, doctor, and I'd know it." That was the first crack. Just a small one. A line that landed harder than it should have, and Vance felt it land, and he didn't like the feeling. So he did what men like Vance do when a woman they've dismissed turns out to be right. He got louder. "Vitals when you can spare them, Nolan. I'll be with patients who have names." He walked off. His shoes did not squeak. He'd bought the good ones. Eli watched him go, and something moved in his jaw, but he said nothing. He crouched at Harper's other side and put his hands to the man's shoulders, and the 2 of them rolled the stranger together. Easy, wordless, a thing their hands had done 100 times. When the monitor finally reached them and the leads went on, the rhythm that scrolled across the little screen was the kind that made a room go quiet if the room was paying attention. The room was not. Harper was. She had seen that rhythm before. She had seen it in places that squeaked with nothing but wind and torn metal, at altitudes where the floor tilted under you, and the only light was the light you carried, in a life she had not spoken about in 4 years and did not intend to start speaking about now. She reached for the crash cart out of pure muscle memory and broke the seal on the top drawer with her thumb, and the little snap of it was as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. "I need pads," she said. "Already have them." Eli set them in her hand before she'd finished the sentence. He'd read her the moment she reached for the cart. He always could. Harper began the small, careful work of the overlooked, the work no one photographs and no one thanks you for, the work of trying to keep a stranger's heart beating when the whole building had decided he wasn't worth the electricity. She did not know who he was. That was the part that mattered, later, when everyone was trying to explain it to themselves. She did not know. There was nothing in that soaked gray coat to tell her, and she did not check, because checking would have been a way of asking whether he deserved it, and Harper Nolan had spent her whole life on the wrong end of that question. She had promised herself she would never once put another human being there. So she knelt on wet tile in her squeaking shoes and her stained cardigan, and she treated the nameless man exactly as if he were the most important person in the country, which, as it happened, he was. 4 years earlier, Harper had a different life and a different last name on her jacket. She flew. She was a flight nurse on a helicopter crew, the kind that goes out in weather that grounds everyone else, that lands in a field at 2 in the morning and works a dying body by the light of a headlamp while the rotors scream overhead. She was one of the best in her region, though you'd never have gotten her to say so, because the people who are actually the best rarely need to tell you. Then there was a night with ice on the rotors, and a call they should have refused, and a mountain that came up faster than the instruments said. Harper walked away from something that 3 other people did not. She stopped flying. She stopped talking about flying. She let her certifications lapse on purpose, because a certification was a door and she did not trust herself to keep it shut. She took a name that had been her grandmother's and the night shift in a city where nobody knew her, and she made herself small and told herself small was safe. She carried the whole story on her skin, high on her left shoulder where the cardigan covered it, a small set of inked wings and a date. She'd gotten them the week she qualified, back when she was proud, back when being seen was a thing she wanted. Now she kept them covered. You can be seen for your worth or you can be safe, and she had chosen safe and had almost convinced herself that safe was the same as peace. The squeak of her shoes said otherwise. Every day, the rhythm on the monitor was the kind that medicine has a plan for. There is a right order to these things, a protocol, a set of steps in a set sequence, and some of those steps require a doctor's word before they happen. Harper knew the protocol better than most doctors in that building. She also knew it assumed the doctor would come when called. Vance did not come when called. He was 3 curtains down, explaining to a college kid why his sprained wrist wasn't broken, and when Deborah, the tired night charge who had seen everything and expected nothing, put her head in and said the John Doe was crashing, Vance said the words a great many people would later wish he had not. "He's a drunk on the floor, Deb. If he codes, we'll code him. I'm not running a full workup on somebody who'll be gone by shift change and back next week." And he turned back to the wrist. Harper looked down at the nameless man. His color was going. His pulse under her fingers had thinned to a thread, and the thread was fraying. She had a machine telling her his heart was failing in a specific way that she had a specific tool for, and a doctor who would not come, and a choice. There is a thing you can do when a heart forgets how to keep its own time. You use the machine to send the beat in from the outside, through the skin, a jolt in rhythm that takes over the metronome the body has dropped. It requires judgment and a steady hand and, ordinarily, a doctor's order. Harper had done it more times than she could count in the back of a shaking aircraft with no doctor for 50 miles and no time to wait for one. Her hands knew it the way your hands know your own front door in the dark. The gel was cold when she squeezed it onto the pads, straight from the duct-taped fridge in the corner that nobody had fixed in 2 years. The handle held on by a strip of silver tape gone gray at the edges. She warmed it a second between her palms out of habit, out of kindness, because even now, even here, she was thinking about a stranger's comfort. Then she set the pads and looked at Deborah. "I'm going to pace him, transcutaneous. I don't have an order." Her voice was level, quiet, the voice of someone who has made this kind of decision under worse conditions than fluorescent light. "Write down the time. Write down that I told you exactly what I was doing and why. Every word, Deb. I'm not hiding a thing. You could lose your job." "I've lost more than a job before." Harper looked at the man on the floor, the one everyone had decided not to see. "I'm not losing him too." Eli didn't argue. He put himself at her shoulder and said, "Lo, I saw it too. Whatever comes after, I saw it too." And that was all. It was enough. She brought the beat in from the outside. "I want you to sit in that room for a moment, because it is the center of everything that comes after. Picture the wet tile and the gray light and the duct-taped fridge humming in the corner. Picture a heavy, tired woman in a stained cardigan kneeling over a stranger the whole world had thrown away, doing a hard and forbidden thing with steady hands, because it was right, and for no other reason on this earth. No one was watching who mattered. There was no reward coming, and she did not know one was. She simply refused to let a man die of being unimportant." The rhythm caught. You could see it catch. The thread under Harper's fingers went from a fray to a pulse to a beat. A real beat, borrowed at first, and then, minute by minute, the man's own heart remembering its job and taking the timing back. His color came up, his lips lost the gray, his chest rose on its own and kept rising, and Deborah let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like a year. That was the exact moment Vance came through the curtain. He saw the pads. He saw the monitor. He saw a nurse he had told to take vitals running a procedure she had no order for on a patient he had personally written off. "What in God's name are you doing?" "Keeping him alive," Harper said, and did not stop. "Because you don't stop. Not for anyone. Not until it's finished." You paced a patient without an order, without a physician present, on a John Doe. Vance's voice climbed the way voices climb when the person knows, somewhere underneath, that they're on the wrong side of it. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You're a floor nurse, Nolan. You take vitals. You don't?" "Doctor." Deborah's voice flat. "The time's written down, all of it, including what you said when I called you." For half a second, something crossed Vance's face. A flicker, quick and unwilling. The look of a man who hears his own words read back and does not like the shape of them. It was there and then he buried it, because burying it was easier than feeling it. The curtain was open. Half the night staff had drifted closed the way people do when the air changes, and they stood in a loose ring and watched a young doctor lose his footing in public and refuse to admit it. And instead of stepping back, he made it about her. "You want to play hero? Play it somewhere else. Write her up. I want her gone." He looked Harper up and down, the cardigan, the squeaking shoes, the ordinariness she'd wrapped around herself like armor, and said the thing he would spend the rest of his life wishing he had swallowed. "Look at you. You're not exactly the picture of somebody I'd trust with a man's life." The room went silent. Eli took one step, and Harper caught his eye, one small look, and he stopped. This was hers. She stood up, slowly, because her knees ached from the tile. She peeled off her gloves and set them in the bin, and she looked at Vance, and for one long moment, the whole floor saw a thing they had never seen before. That this quiet, heavy, overlooked woman was not, in fact, small. She had only been folded up. "You're right. You should write me up. I did it without an order, and I'd do it again, and if the board takes my license for it, then it takes it." She reached down and, very gently, tucked a warmed blanket around the shoulders of the man whose life she'd just kept, the way you'd tuck in someone you loved. "But you don't get to tell me what I am. You looked at a soaked coat and decided a man wasn't worth your time, and you looked at me and decided the same thing. You've been wrong twice tonight, doctor. You just don't know how wrong yet." And she walked out. She walked past the ring of faces and down the corridor, her shoes squeaking the whole way, that awful, faithful sound, and she made it through the double doors and into the stairwell before her hands began to shake. She sat down on the cold concrete step, alone. The stairwell smelled of dust and old paint, and the light buzzed, and Harper pressed her shaking hands flat against her knees and held them there until they stopped, the way she'd learned a long time ago in a life she'd walked away from. She did not cry. She wanted to, and she didn't, because crying felt like agreeing with him, and she would not agree with him. She had done the right thing. She knew she had, and knowing it and being punished for it were, apparently, still going to happen in the same night, the way they always had. When she finally pushed the stairwell door open, there was a paper cup of coffee sitting on the ledge outside it, still warm, steam thinning in the cold air. No note, no one waiting to be thanked, just Eli, halfway down the corridor with his back to her already, walking off to the bay like a man who'd only happened to be passing. He had known she wouldn't want to be seen crying. He had known she wouldn't want to be alone either. So he'd found the one thing that could sit with her without asking anything of her, and he'd left it, and he'd gone. Harper stood there with her hands around the warmth of it for a long moment, and something in her chest that had been clenched for 4 years loosened by the smallest degree. Let me pause here, just for a breath, because this is a hard place in the story, and you've come a long way into it with me. If any of this is landing somewhere real, if you've ever been the one kneeling on the floor doing right while someone louder called it wrong, then stay with me to the end. It changes. I promise you it changes. Now, back to the man in the gray coat. He woke a little before 4 in the morning. He surfaced in pieces. The first thing he knew was warmth. A blanket, tucked snug, the way his mother used to tuck it a very long time ago. The second was the monitor, its steady beep, his own heart keeping its own time. And the third, when he got his eyes to focus, was a low, anxious question rising in his chest. "Where's the nurse?" he said. His voice came out rough. There was a nurse, on the floor with me, heavy set, kind. Where is she? Deborah was closest. She's off the floor, sir. It's complicated. How are you feeling? Like I'd be dead. He got a hand free of the blanket and looked at it. And I sent my people off myself. Foolish old man. Told them I could walk 2 blocks in the rain alone. He pressed the heel of his hand to his eye. Deborah went very still, the way you go still when a shape you'd assumed was a shrub turns out to be a person. "Sir, what's your name?" he told her. Quietly, without any weight on it, the way genuinely important people so often say the thing that stops a room. And Deborah's face did something that 3 separate witnesses would later describe as the face of a woman watching the floor open under a resident who was standing 15 feet away and had not yet had the good sense to be afraid. Because the man in the soaked gray coat, the John Doe on the floor, the one Vance had called a drunk and left to die in the corner, was a United States Senator, a man whose face had been on the news that very week, fighting over exactly this, over hospitals, over how the poor and the unnamed get treated when nobody's watching. He had come to that hospital on purpose and in disguise, in a plain coat with nothing in his pockets, to see with his own eyes how a man with no name gets handled at 3 in the morning when he cannot pull rank. He had sent his aides and his detail 2 blocks off. He had wanted the truth. He had found it, on the floor. And most of all, he had found it in a heavy, tired, overlooked woman in a stained cardigan, who had knelt in the wet, broken a rule, warmed the gel between her palms, and refused to let him be nobody. "Find that nurse," the senator said, and now there was steel under the rough. Before she goes home and disappears. Her type disappears. Vance, 15 feet away, had gone the color of the tile. The senator found him with his eyes. "You," he said, "you called me a drunk. I heard you." He let that sit 1 terrible second. Then, quieter, almost tired. "You looked at a wet coat and decided a life could wait. Go find her. Make it right while you still can." They found Harper in the stairwell. Deborah opened the door and Harper looked up, her hands steady again, her face composed, already braced for the write-up, the meeting, the slow machinery of being told she was too small and too much at the same time. Just tell me, am I suspended or fired? I'd rather know now. Harper. Deborah crouched down in front of her, which Deborah did not do, ever, for anyone. The man you saved. You need to come upstairs. By the time the sun came up over Washington, the lobby had filled with Capitol Police, dark uniforms at every entrance, badges and earpieces, and the stillness people carry when they guard something that matters. Black vehicles under the awning, with the rain still coming down on them. And every one of those serious, credentialed people, when Harper came through the doors in her stained cardigan and her squeaking shoes, turned to look at her. Not past her, at her. She crossed that lobby, and this time her shoes squeaked in a silence so complete that everyone heard it. That faithful announcing sound she had hated her whole life, and for the first time, she did not want it to stop. Let them hear her coming. She had earned the sound of her own feet. The senator was sitting up when she reached the bed, frail in the daylight, human, a man who had come close to the edge and knew it. But his eyes were sharp, and they found her, and stayed. "There she is," he said softly, "the one who wouldn't let me be nobody." Harper said the true thing, because true was all she'd ever had. "I didn't know who you were." "I know," he nodded slowly. "That's the whole thing." He reached out and took her steady, capable hand in both of his. His voice caught, and he let it. "Where'd you learn to do what you did?" That wasn't floor nurse work. And Harper Nolan, who had covered the wings on her shoulder with wool for 4 years, felt the question land in the one place she'd been protecting. "I used to fly," she said, barely above a whisper. "Flight nurse. There was a crash, 4 years back. 3 people I loved didn't come home and I did. So I stopped. I made myself small on purpose, because being seen was how I lost them." She shook her head, unable to finish it. The words she'd never said to anyone in 4 years spilling out to a stranger, because he was the first person in years who'd actually wanted to know. The senator held her hand and let her get there. He didn't make a speech. He was too tired for one, and too honest. He only said, quiet and certain, "Then stop hiding, young lady." Harper looked at him, and something behind her eyes, some door held shut for 4 years by her own 2 hands, moved. She stood in the middle of that lobby, with the light coming gray and clean through the tall windows, and she reached up, slowly, and pulled the collar of her cardigan down off her left shoulder. There they were, the wings, and the date beneath them, the mark she'd hidden for 4 years, the proof of the woman she used to be, and, it turned out, had never once stopped being. She let them see it, all of them, and she did not fold up, and she did not get smaller, and her hands did not shake. "That's who I am," she said, to the room, to the senator, to Vance in his corner, to herself most of all. "I'm the nurse who wouldn't let you be nobody, and I'm done pretending I'm nobody either." The senator's eyes were wet. He didn't hide it. There she finally is. Vance found her before her shift ended. He didn't make excuses. "I looked at you and saw nothing," he said, "and you were the only one in the building who saw everything. I don't expect you to forgive it. I just needed to say I know it." And Harper, who understood better than anyone what it cost to be dismissed and what it cost to change, gave him the only thing worth giving. "Then don't do it to the next one." He didn't. That was the whole of his redemption, and it was enough. They asked her to fly again, not as a favor, not as punishment reversed, but as a role offered to the best person for it, which she was, and had always been, and which everyone had somehow managed not to see until a nameless man in a soaked coat made them look. She took her time answering. She had earned that. And on the morning she gave her answer, it was Eli who was standing by the bay doors, in the gray new light, hands in his pockets, quiet as ever. He'd never once asked her about the wings. He'd only ever handed her what she needed before she asked, and left the coffee on the ledge, and walked off before she could thank her. She stopped in front of him, and neither of them was any good at the words, and neither of them needed to be. "You'll be up in the weather," he said, "the bad nights." The bad nights are the ones that need somebody, she said. He nodded. He looked at her a long moment, longer than a man like Eli usually let himself look. And then he said the small, plain, enormous thing, "Come back then, when you're down. I'll leave the light on." And Harper, who had spent 4 years believing she could be seen for her worth or be safe, but never both, understood at last that she had been wrong about that too. Being seen for what you truly are is a different cost entirely from being seen for what you're not, and it turns out to feel a great deal like coming home. She kept the wings uncovered after that. She let her shoes squeak, and she let them all hear her coming. These stories are made with love. If this one stayed with you, subscribe to the channel. That is all I ask.